Hey everyone, welcome to what I pretty much guarantee is going to be the South by Southwest with the worst barbecue, but maybe also the shortest lines for the bathroom. So, you win some, you lose some. Welcome to When to Go Away is a Powerful Brand Message. Thank you for joining us in our little session. My name is Ishan Sherwood. I am Associate Creativity Editor at Ad Age, and I am joined by Rob Jonas, Chief Revenue Officer at Foursquare, and Esther Raphael, Chief Marketing Officer at Intersection. Hey all, how you doing?
Hi.
Hi.
So I think typically the line you get in the ad industry is like brand safety and driving traffic. But this last year has been completely about consumer safety and driving away foot traffic. It's been a very weird year. So in this session, we're going to talk about new ways that data is being used to facilitate this strange marketing and public health directive. And to kick it off, to sort of tie it all together, the reason we have Intersection and Foursquare here is because of a pretty cool campaign last year that you may have seen if you were carefully wandering the streets of New York City. Esther, can you fill in anyone who may not know about it?
Sure, I'd love to. Intersection is an out-of-home media and technology company, and one of the products we are most known for is Link NYC. We're also really known for the editorial we create and run across our digital network, including on the Link NYC network. Our content suite includes localized messaging, transit and community information, and creative partnerships with local nonprofits and institutions. And because of this, consumers know to look to our screens for inspiration and helpful information. As COVID entered the story, we knew we had to pivot some of our messaging to make sure that we were serving the community that when they were dealing with this new reality. And one of the ways we did this is through our partnership with Foursquare. Think about one of the greatest everyday stressors we've all experienced over the past year: getting groceries and supplies. When do I go? How do I avoid lines? Will it be safe? Something that was once a mundane errand has now become a point of stress and a point of fear. That's what we wanted to solve for. So using Foursquare's aggregated location data, we were able to display the average hourly traffic levels for nearby grocery stores and pharmacies on thousands of intersection screens. This gave consumers a heads up on the best time to shop to avoid the crowds. We like to call it crowd balancing, and you can use hashtag crowd balancing 2021 to share your feedback and thoughts on this panel. When we paired the data with the convenience of screens located in the hearts of neighborhoods, it provided an undeniable utility for consumers, and it helped them to address the challenges of living in these current times. The campaign ran in New York and Philadelphia with both data and copy customized down to the local neighborhood. It's one of my favorite campaigns that launched during the pandemic, and I'm looking forward to diving a little deeper into it today.
It was cool wandering around the city at the time to sort of see it, like out of the corner of your eye on one of the Link NYC kiosks, which, like, pro tip, the best Wi-Fi at Advertising Week New York every single year is the Link NYC kiosk on the street outside. And just to be like, oh right, I've seen this on my Foursquare app before, right? Like the same kind of like the bars, like when do I want to go to this place? And now it's it's flipped on its head.
It's actually it was actually a super interesting campaign for lots of reasons. I think, look, obviously last year there was just a fundamental change to every aspect of life and normal life that we can possibly imagine. And one of the things we say at Foursquare a lot when we talk about our business is where matters, and probably that phrase had even more significance over the last 9 months than any time prior. This was just a super interesting project to work on because obviously we took data which is often used to drive consumers to a specific location. We kind of flipped it on its head, and that's kind of the core concept of what we're talking about here. How can we actually create utility and even more value from the data we have to actually help consumers and individuals make the right choices about how to avoid potentially dangerous situations at times, and really kind of deploy that in the most effective way. So it's been a really interesting and unique project for us to work on, and we've had phenomenal positive feedback in New York as we've rolled out the project with Intersection.
You see a lot these days, sort of unexpected winners and losers from this past year, and Foursquare is not a company where I would have been at the beginning of the pandemic, been like, oh yeah, they're really gonna know what to do with this and turn this around. There's a company that's based on telling people when to go to places.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously we have a large part of our business focused on the advertising ecosystem, working with thousands of brands and agencies to help them understand how to drive customers towards specific outcomes, often in offline locations. And what we saw last year was just a complete change in terms of how our customers were thinking about that model for advertising to their venues and locations. What was really, really compelling was how quickly some of these advertisers and customers changed their model. So, in Q2 last year, when effectively most of the world went into lockdown, if you were a retailer, if you were a convenience restaurant, if you were anybody who was used to interacting with customers on a physical basis, you had to completely change your message and your marketing model to actually reach them and engage with them in a way that you hadn't done before. And what we saw in a very, very short period of time, in literally a matter of weeks and months, is advertising departments at large enterprises completely change their messaging strategy and turn it on its head. It was a revolution that occurred in a very, very short period of time. And of course, the obvious point is that was entirely fueled by data, and Foursquare as a location data platform and partner to many of these companies was able to kind of enable that data at massive scale very, very quickly in a way which was beneficial to all these customers.
I think it's important to note, sorry, I think it's important to note that also in this case, we're not deterring visits. So it still speaks to the spirit of what Foursquare always does. We're just optimizing when you should visit for both the patrons and employees, right? So patrons deal with less of a crowd and employees are able to better serve a steady flow of visitors.
That's interesting. Yeah, I want to get into more of this. I want to pick both of your brains, Esther and Rob, about this campaign, but then also other ways that data can potentially be used these days. So I think one of the weirdest things that has struck me about the pandemic is I hear people sort of complaining about how they miss seeing billboards. And it's not a thing that, most people sort of pined for back in the day, but, now, people are missing their commutes, which is strange. But I'm sort of wondering, what consumer behaviors and insights have developed over the past year in this new ecosystem? And then, how are advertisers responding in the out-of-home category? Maybe Esther, you can take this one to start.
Well, luckily, Link NYC is on the streets of the city. So regardless of your commute, if you weren't going to work, you were still journeying to the grocery store, to the pharmacy, and it was still a very big part of that journey. One of the biggest changes in behavior we've seen is this notion of taking your life and living your life outdoors. So dining outside, working out outside, curbside pickup, walking and biking increased more than we have seen in years past. And not only that, but that moment where you get to leave the four walls that you're looking at your screen at work or just being inside your home to get a breath of fresh air. We know that consumers have been more excited to be outside and happier outside, but also more engaged than ever before. So as advertisers start to think about what that means for their brands, it's important that during this time, if you were deploying only a mobile and desktop strategy, that you think about the people who are looking at your brands and your ads. They're in a space they're reluctant to be in. You've been looking at your screen all day. Think about on Sunday or Saturday when the screen time report pops up on your phone, that like pit in your stomach that you get, that like the phone knows how long you've been looking at your email, your checks, your G-chats, it knows. But on the flip side, when you leave your screen, when you walk outside, how much joy that brings to you and that moment of fresh air.
From our perspective, it was really interesting. Obviously, we have data at massive scale in terms of movement patterns of individuals and consumers collected in a consent-driven way, of course. What we saw starting in March was just a massive collapse in offline or outdoor behavior as lockdowns kind of rolled out in the US and around the world. And then what we saw, of course, is as those lockdowns started to ease and patterns of behavior in the real world started to change, we had a micro level set of detail around what was really happening. And kind of one of the really interesting watershed moments for me was probably in, I would say, mid Q2, as we started to see some of the early lockdowns kind of reversing. I think one of the first states that chose to kind of reverse the lockdown was Georgia. And we had one of our large QSR customers come to us and say, okay, fine, we're starting to see things easing up in this particular market. Foursquare, can you tell us what's actually happening? How are you seeing behavior patterns change? Are we seeing people start to leave their homes again? Are they trying to visit our stores and locations? Are they visiting other types of locations? What are they actually doing? And for us to be able to share that information back to them was incredibly powerful for them. And then what it allowed them to do, of course, was work out how that influences their tactics and their plans and their strategies as other states start to ease those lockdowns. So what we found is sort of even small glimpses of data and understanding around behavior were being used to kind of completely changed strategy around planning and activation as large parts of the countries came out of lockdown.
Hmm. Yeah, can we sort of dive into some of the logistics of the data? Like Rob, how do you measure what a visit is specifically? Like what counts as a visit, especially these days, and how does that influence how you understand something like foot traffic to grocery stores or pharmacies and things like that?
Yeah, so at Foursquare, we're very good at understanding when an individual visits a particular location. In fact, we're so good, we actually received MRC accreditation for our technology around how we detect visits last year, and we're one of the first companies to ever receive accreditation for that type of technology, which is great for us. In terms of the detail, as I mentioned, we're collecting in a consent-driven way data from mobile phones and devices that allow us to understand GPS coordinates at a particular point in time. And then using technologies we've built and refined over multiple years, we're able to determine whether or not a device and therefore an individual is actually at that location. And there's lots of kind of important signals that we take into account there. So it's, how long have they been at that particular location? Which direction were they heading in when they reached that location? What were the exact start and stop times of them reaching that specific point? All these individual signals then factor into us understanding and making a determination that this particular individual was at this particular location for a period of time, and therefore we then decide whether that visit is valid and true or not. So that's great for kind of understanding if an individual's walking into a retail store or a quick service restaurant or a car dealership or in fact any location. I think it then becomes super interesting when you apply it back to the out-of-home model, where obviously you're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of electronic and static placements for out-of-home advertising. We then go through the same process of understanding what an individual's interaction is with those particular pieces of advertising as well, and use the same model to determine whether or not an individual's been exposed to that piece of advertising. So there's a lot of data that sits underneath what we do. There's a lot of technology we've built over many, many years to understand whether that visit's happening. And that's what allows us to really understand what that interaction is.
Yeah, it's really important, I think, for viewers to understand that like the technology has come a long way since needing to check in at a place and like telling the app or like handing out your data and saying, yes, I am definitely here.
Yeah, and check-ins are they're still incredibly valuable. That allows us to really get user-driven feedback that I was at this location, but we can do an awful lot more with the technology in the background, understanding how devices move through the physical world and understanding their interaction with it. And that's core to understanding all these behavior patterns and movement patterns, which are a foundation of everything we do.
And on the intersection side, we work with Foursquare for just that reason. It's more important than ever to help our clients understand the impact of their advertising dollars. So we work with partners like Foursquare to measure real-time behavior like foot traffic or digital event measurement, which would show if you actually downloaded an app or made a purchase online as a result of your out-of-home exposure.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool intersection here, where you have Foursquare looking at a physical place that a person entered, right? But when you're talking about out of home, you're dealing with sight lines, and I don't know. Actually, it just sort of the possibilities of deciding like where to place something and like where your media is and who your audience might be. Like actually might be, right? Like someone who happens to be driving by that day. I think there are probably so many different applications and like cool, interesting applications. Can we talk a little bit about like changing the mindset around coming up with a campaign like this or a campaign in pandemic times? Like I can think of, in years past, I would want data about when nobody is at D'Agostino's or whatever, so I know if I need to put on real pants in order to go there, But how did you have to reverse your thinking? Rob, you talked about like flipping it on its head, about going from driving visits to a location, pulling people in or pushing them there versus now having to deter them from visiting. Or Esther, you made the point that you're not necessarily deterring, you're sort of shifting. Can you both talk about that?
I think with this one and in many things we do today, it's about going at the right time, right? So working from an office, if you are open, making sure that you are balancing a group A and group B so that there is an appropriate amount of space and social distancing. So in this example, it was solving for a problem that we know many, many consumers, especially those living in the city, trying to get into a grocery store or pharmacy, especially in the very beginning of this, was really challenging and really stressful. To this day, when I leave to get groceries, think like, is this the best time to go? We don't have Link on Long Island. Is this the best time to go? And how long am I going to be waiting outside? Do I need a coat? Like, what else do I need to bring with me to actually endure this line? We wanted to solve for a problem, and Foursquare is a great partner of ours who came up with this solution that would give consumers the best data, the best information to make sure that experience was less stressful.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a really interesting concept because for us, for our advertising business, it's all around obviously driving consumers to actually do things, not to inform them about not doing things. So it really was turning the model on its head. But data itself is very extensible. You can use it in multiple different ways, and that's one of the great things about it. So I think of this as a campaign for public good. It's around using data in a way which is to help. Obviously during a very, very difficult period, and just the creative concept, we can't take credit for the creative concept, but if somebody comes to us with a really compelling idea around how our data can be used, we can usually find a way to make it work. And this is a great example of us doing that.
Are you able to measure the impact or effectiveness of out-of-home ad campaigns on railroad behavior? Like, you are trying to get people to like do or not do a particular action. Like, how effective did it turn out to be?
So we can absolutely measure the effectiveness of out-of-home advertising. So we're able to understand whether or not consumers have been exposed to a piece of advertising, whether it's a static billboard or digital billboards at a very, very granular level, from stadium scale down to individual pieces of digital advertising in large retail locations. So we can do that, and of course we can then understand post-exposure whether or not that changed behavior in terms of driving a consumer to a particular outcome. In terms of measuring the effectiveness of this particular campaign, we decided not to do that because this was really around information and sharing data in a way that benefits individuals and helps them make good choices. But in general, we have a large and robust business helping our advertisers and customers understand the effectiveness of their out-of-home advertising.
And I would add on this campaign, it actually did get a lot of social coverage from consumers and users walking and around the city and sharing their feedback with us.
I think it also helped as well that it was just like super visually engaging. I mean, I'm not based in New York, but having seen the pictures, this was a really eye-catching way to bring data to life, and that kind of visualization is always super compelling.
Yeah, you've got these, heat maps, and you've got the maps that sort of remind me of things that were ubiquitous at the time, at the beginning of the pandemic, which were tracking cases, and as they moved across the country. And this was, this was like a sort of nicer version of that. Like, oh, this is where everybody is traveling or not traveling, right? Like the residences were listed there. People just sort of like staying in their tiny little area where they lived. It I think really did a good job of literally illustrating the data, which I always appreciate as well. I do want to talk a bit about e-commerce in general, and mobile during COVID and also after COVID. I think people couldn't necessarily predict how mobile was going to be effective during the pandemic, right? Were people just going to stay home and not use their devices? Were they only going to be using their devices exclusively, like mostly in bed? So there's been a lot of talk about that, but to compare that to something like urban storefronts, which are in lots of places being, abandoned. How do you both see out of home playing a bigger role in a world where, every billboard now is digital, which like back in the day was just sort of a Blade Runner concept. Esther, can you maybe kick us off?
Sure. So urban storefronts historically have served a dual purpose. So the first is obviously to transact, but the second is also that visual reminder of your brand's existence, right? So assume you have done extensive research to know where to put your store. You want to be in front of your customers all the time. And without that storefront, sure, you can move all of your commerce online, but you're still going to be missing that unblockable, unmissable reminder that you're there to help them. And I think that that's where out-of-home advertising can really come into play. You might be able to use it. You might not have had the opportunity to advertise a sale or a product launch in your storefront now if you don't have one or you have few locations, but you can do it on targeted out-of-home screens. We've actually seen this with a lot of DTC brands, including Dagny Dover, Away Luggage, and Buffy Comforters, to name a few, where they're using our media, both digital and static, to target and reach their audience in key neighborhoods.
Yeah, I think, look, from our perspective, the pandemic of the last several quarters, obviously Q2 was extremely disruptive as we all kind of understood what was happening. I think shortly thereafter, from a mobile phone usage perspective, things didn't really miss a beat. Our business continued to grow and thrive as consumers were engaging with their mobile devices as much as they were with their desktop devices at home and increasingly outdoors as well. And that's a very, very valuable part of the media mix for most of our customers. What we've found now is, again, back to this point around just advertiser sophistication increasing. It's not just about what's my message on a mobile device or what's my message on an out-of-home environment. It's how do those two things combine and interact. And of course, the tactics also tie it all together. We've all seen just the massive rise of buy online, pick up in store over the last 2 or 3 quarters at a truly terrifying and unprecedented rate. And of course, all the advertising and message that supports that is multi-channel, every sense of the word. And then for us, one of the fantastic advantages, what underpins all of this, it's the underlying data. It's understanding where consumers are, how they're interacting with this media, what are they doing as a result of the message they're exposed to, and how do you measure the effectiveness of that? So it all turns full circle with data as a kind of key component of understanding here.
Mm. Has the effectiveness of ad targeting ramped up in the last year? Like, it strikes me that, normally you would be able to say, hey, 30,000 people are going to be at this stadium in a particular location. Maybe I should buy ad space there. And now everything's dispersed. At most, you're getting 5 to 10 people in one location. Sometimes everybody's just in a completely different location all the time.
For us, again, it comes back to the size and corpus and scale of the data you can build and collate. If an advertiser or a customer is used to seeing particular offline behaviors, we can pull back on years of data to understand specific audience characteristics and groups we can put customers into to help them really kind of extend their targeting and reach over a period of time. So yes, whilst behavior fundamentally changed, again, you can put data at the core of what you're doing and allow yourself to then continue what you have been doing, albeit adjusting your message to the environment you're in now.
And on our end, we get this request a lot, especially now, to your point, Ishan. You can't necessarily say, we know there's going to be a big concert at Madison Square Garden, so you should take over all the screens outside. But we do have tools and data that help us locate where the audiences are right now. So where you live, based by demographic or based by psychographic, particular requests from clients, we're able to translate that into audience profiles that they can target.
Very cool. I mean, it does feel to me a bit like there's been this recent sort of renaissance of out-of-home creative. It seems like there's a lot more risk-taking, and I think maybe part of that was just having the field open to more kinds of advertisers, simply because everything was upended.
I love that point. There has been a renaissance of beautiful, spectacular, but also effective creative. We actually just launched our own in-house agency. It's called the Creative Labs, to help our partners kick their creative up a notch if they need help. So we're loving that moment right now.
All right, cool. That was super interesting. Both of you, thanks for joining me, and everyone out there at home, hopefully. Thanks for listening. Again, I'm Ishan Sherwood, Associate Creativity Editor at Ad Age, here with Rob Jonas, Chief Revenue Officer at Foursquare, and Esther Raphael, Chief Marketing Officer at Intersection. See ya.